Continuing on with commonly seen forms, this is the form specifically for if they had a fixture lease. So you can see examples here, solar panel, propane tank, water softener, security system. Those are the most common ones. I've heard in other markets about like water heater before. This is something that should be gone over with the seller at a listing appointment, and it should be in the advertised on the transaction desk if they have something like this. Transparency is the best policy, but also disclosure is the best policy. So you don't want to go under contract or make an offer on a property and then find out, oh wait, they have a security system that's on lease and they expect the buyer to take over the lease, or they're going to remove it. Because otherwise, a security system is considered something that's supposed to stay with the home. So if they remove it, now you've got a problem. So this is something that is on page 1 of the contract, disclosed. And if it is, then it's the kind of the seller's responsibility to tell you, because you don't have the ability to just know. Some AT&T or ADT or Vivint systems are leased and some are owned. So that's really the seller's job to tell that to you. But it doesn't hurt to just to ask or double check if the agent's not on it and they're kind of lazy. This would basically specify, though, if it's going to remain or not, if like a buyer is expected to take over payments, and if so, how long, all of those things. But especially if it's like a solar lease, you would need to explain and include that it's solar lease, how much it costs, that it will remain with the house, and that you're expecting the buyer to take over the payments and take over the liability. So that's very important. And once again, there's 2 check marks in the contract for it. There's on the first page of the 1 to 4 family, there's this entire area asking about leases. So you would check that there was a fixture lease, for example, for security or solar. And then you would also list it on paragraph 22. You would also list here regarding fixture leases as well. So very important to make sure all your boxes are checked. The next couple forms are just our brokerage CYAs, as I say. So this is disclosing that we have a connection network that basically people pay towards with our residential service contracts, home warranties. They may be paying a service fee to the brokerage, but we're not getting kickbacks from them. This is a buyer and seller signed form. And then we have an affiliated business disclosure that discloses that Century 21 Judge Fight owns 70% of DT and of Judge Fight Insurance. I normally will tell my sellers that we're not using their services, but like with my buyers, all the buyers are going to automatically get quoted with Judge Fight Insurance. Personally, I don't really use designated titles, so that's not an issue, but it is something that has to be disclosed. This is a form that will be in the contract packet. We are now getting into forms that are not sent over to a seller. So all these forms are potential ones that would go between the buyer and the seller both signing. The forms I'm going to go over next are ones that are kind of between you and the buyer that need to be in your folder or in your file, but not necessarily ones you don't have to have them signed more than once. They just go in the folder for disclosure purposes. So all buyers and sellers see this general notice to buyer form, basically disclosing definitions of different common terms that we use in real estate. Once again, it's a bunch of CYAs as far as flood, registered sex offenders, what a homeowners association is, mineral right information, which we'll talk about in a second, insurance, residential service contracts, once again, school boundaries, all kinds of things. It also discloses what like an inspection period is, an appraisal, and an inspection, and a home inspection, things like that. So this is something that my clients will sign initially, normally when they sign their buyer representation agreement, or if it's a seller at the listing agreement. And that's about how I go through it. Literally, I don't stop and talk about each one. I give like a generalization on these different big terms. Another thing to talk about, and a thing that especially buyers that are not super familiar with Texas need to understand and go over, is minerals. This form is in with my buyers, but it's also in my listing packet. So with a listing, I will ask my seller if they have mineral rights or if they know. If they don't know, or if they know they don't have them, then they just sign this form easy peasy, and we won't sign a reservation of mineral rights form. If the sellers know that they own the minerals and know they want to keep the minerals, there's a specific form for retaining mineral rights. For my buyers, what I tell them is that this discloses I am not a landman. I do not know who owns the minerals for the property. If they really want to find out, then it would be the buyer's objective to pay someone to find out who owns the minerals. Essentially, how it works, if the buyer from the past or owner from the past retains the mineral rights, then the current owner does not have them to give to the new owner. The buyer will not receive them because they've been detached from the property. The seller does not have to say anything unless it is a lease. If they're owned by someone else, the seller just keeps their mouth shut and they will not transfer. If the seller does own the mineral rights and does not say anything, they will transfer to the new owner. In all actuality, in most of Dallas-Fort Worth, especially if the home was built within the last 30 years, the farmer who owned the land that sold it to the developer likely retained the mineral rights, or the developer retained the mineral rights before the builder got involved, or the builder kept the mineral rights, and so on. So in most cases, there is no mineral rights to transfer to the new homeowner. Also, if you're in the city, especially if you're in a HOA, it is not common to see it be an issue because they weren't really worth that much, and they also won't have the ability to do any kind of drilling in the area or affect the property. Now, in a case of my home, it was owned by a couple for over 17 years. They had mineral rights. They had gotten divorced, and the husband retained the property and sold the property to us, and he had retained 50% of the mineral rights. And so I wanted them and would not let him purchase them or retain them. So I ended up receiving the mineral rights. I have a few acres and I can actually see drills being done in my area. So I knew that there was some rights there. And sometimes I'll get as much as $1,500 a year from those mineral rights. Had he wanted to keep them and not give them to me, he would have had to write a form and I would have had to sign it, releasing that and letting him keep it. This one is about wire fraud. It's a buyer and a seller form, basically just warning them about wire fraud. Basically, when the closing comes, the title company will send their wiring instructions to the buyer, and the buyer is encouraged to look on Google at the phone number for that title company, not from the email, and to call it and verbally verify the wiring instructions over the phone. That is the safest way to verify the wiring instructions. With a seller, they're just told to bring a printout of their own wiring instructions to hand and have signed, basically, that the title company received them, so that way the title company will wire them their funds after closing, or they can bring a check and just void the check and leave that, and that way they can give their wiring instructions to the title company. I've heard stories of basically scams where they're watching the title company's email address and the title company emails and says, this is our wiring funds to send us your down payment, and then sends a second email that says, oh, actually, these are our new wiring instructions, and the new one is the fake one and looks legit, but is not. We have a few other forms that the buyer is going to sign, but not going to go over to the seller, basically disclosing about information about home inspection. It's really fine if you aren't filling this out because you're going to give them the information later, but that they are choosing to have a home inspection. And there's even a form for your protection, get a home inspection, that I will have them initial at the bottom when they electronically sign their first set of offers, making sure that they understand they fully have the right to have the home inspected. Next one is about property insurance. So I will ask a seller whenever I'm listing a property if they've ever made an insurance claim. If they say yes, I say, great. Did you use that money towards that purpose? Like if you got money for a roof, did you use it for the roof? And they'll say, oh, of course, yes. So, okay, great. You're good then. But there is a thing called a clue report, which is basically a database of open insurance claims. And if they got money for the roof and then took it to Las Vegas instead, it would get red flagged and the roof would have to be taken care of prior to closing. This is basically just warning people of the potential of insurance fraud being a bad thing. This I will have people initial, which is basically just the TREC disclosure if they wanted to complain to the Texas Real Estate Commission. So I just have them initial at the bottom. And then this is another form that I did want to go over. This is specifically the 2402 is what we call it because that's the number on the form, Texas Realtor 2402 form. This one is a fairly new form for us. And this is what we use to disclose compensation if we did not list anything in 12 here on, there we go. If I did not list anything here, so say I didn't put that there, I didn't put my commission in that paragraph, then instead I would leave this blank and I would include that 2402. I personally typically provide the 2402. So this would be listing brokerage information, our brokerage information, address, client's name. This will be the date of our offer, and then this will be typically a couple months protection. And then I list my commission that I am seeking there. And this is basically saying that the listing agent has made an agreement with the seller to pay a portion of the commission to the buyer's brokerage. The title company takes care of all of the funds. Effectively, there's no difference for us as far as tax implications or payment if it is on the 2402 versus the 12 A1B. It really does not make a difference. What does make a difference is how their listing forms are drawn up. If their listing forms say they are not paying any commission from the listing side, then you'd be using the 12 A1B. If it says that they are, so on my listing agreements, the way I structure it, I would be providing commission through this 2402 form. But you always need to make sure you've got one or the other, not both, because then otherwise you're expecting double commission and it's a really big rookie move. It's a really easy way for me to tell that you haven't done really many transactions in the last almost year based on if you do both. Or definitely don't do neither because now you are working for free. So you need to have one or the other. Huge, 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 very important. Don't forget. I know that was a lot of information, which is also why I included it in multiple videos. I wanted to kind of give it in snippets so you could not just be bogged down by a 1 hour talk, but little areas that you could kind of work through. And I would recommend taking your time to actually read all these paragraphs that I kind of skimmed through. A lot of how I talked through it and how I explain it is how I do that with my clients. So essentially, if I show a buyer homes, they say they're interested in pursuing an offer, I do a market analysis, I send them all their disclosures, I send it all to them, and I make a recommendation based on it being on the market X number of days, and based on this market analysis, I would recommend we structure our offer this way. And I would kind of give them a recommendation on how I would structure the offer to curtail to them. If they need down payment assistance, or if they need to move in really fast, or they have any specific needs so we can accommodate. Once I have that information all agreed on with my client, then I draw up the contract with all the pertinent forms that we need, draw it all up, send it for signature, and I say, you're going to have an email in your inbox. Once you have it open and signed in, give me a call and we're going to go over it together. And then I go over it like we did, explaining to them their rights, their pitfalls, their risks, and make sure that they understand. If there is an error, then I would have to cancel the whole packet and resend it to them. So I typically will review the packet 3 or 4 times before I send it to them because I don't want there to be an error, because it is kind of time consuming to cancel it and then go back through and have signatures redone. It does preset the signatures, so it does save you a little bit of time, but not all the forms have the signatures prepared automatically. So if I actually hit prepare signature and it takes me to this page, I can't just take a form out and I can't easily make an adjustment. It's set now. But it will show me where those initials and signatures will autofill. So that way so basically this is another opportunity for me to go through it. If I missed something, then I would have to actually go all the way back and start over again. So I will check it multiple times before sending it to the client because I want to make sure it is correct rather than having to cancel and resend the whole packet. You'll notice like these are automatically filled for you. including their signatures on these other forms automatically filled for you. You would already need to have everything else filled out though. And then on a few of the forms though, it will not be filled out. So for example, these are already prepared, including for you to sign. On here, it has initials already auto-filled, which does help save you time. So they're going to automatically have to initial those. The color indicates who it is as far as which buyer, but also if it's optional or not, if it's optional versus required. So these are required initials, so they can't complete the signature without it. Once again, those are auto-filled, but like this one, because it's a custom form our brokerage created, it does not autofill. So I would actually have to go in and say buyer's name and then signature. His name and signature. So if I'm making changes, it's quite inconvenient to have to go back and forth because then you have to cancel it and restart. So once again, autofill, automatically initialing, automatically signing, but like this one doesn't have an auto initial, so I would add those. And then this one is not signed by buyer or seller, it's only signed by the two brokers, the two agents, or their associates. So, and then I would hit sign or send. Now with that being said, if you come into on DocuSign under the forms, you can see envelopes here and you can see when they're complete. You can go here and look at history as far as when things are being signed or reviewed. This is important for if the client has received it or not, and just so you can see if it's been reviewed. So like for example, this form was sent out. I can go to view history and I can see like it was sent out, I signed it, they have not viewed it yet. So I can send a reminder if I need them to go in and sign this document. I can also see if they're like reviewing it, because sometimes a client will take some time to look at it before they call you. So it'll say like opened by, and you'll see that they've opened the document. Hopefully this is helpful.